The wind, a mournful sigh, pressed against the windows of Ilara's home. It wasn't a harsh, blustery wind, but a soft, insistent whisper, a sound that seemed to mirror the constant hum of sorrow within her. She sat in the worn armchair by the living room window, a cup of untouched tea cooling on the small table beside her. The late afternoon light, a pale, watery gold, stretched across the polished floorboards, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, tiny, ephemeral specks, much like the fleeting moments of peace she sometimes found. Her gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, where Thomas's fishing hat rested, slightly askew. It was a faded canvas, well-loved, with a few hooks still embedded in the brim. She remembered the day he'd bought it, a spontaneous purchase on a trip to the coast, his face alight with an almost boyish excitement at the prospect of a weekend by the lake. His laugh, a rich, resonant sound, echoed in the silent chambers of her memory, making the quiet of the house feel even more profound. Now, the hat was just an object, a tangible reminder of a joy that felt impossibly distant, like a story she'd once read about someone else. But loneliness was a physical presence in the room, heavy and pervasive. It wasn't just the absence of his voice, his footsteps, his presence. It was the way the silence had taken root, growing into every corner, settling on every surface. The once vibrant walls, painted a cheerful yellow years ago, now seemed muted, absorbing what little light filtered in. The scent of his pipe tobacco, which used to linger faintly, was long gone, replaced by the sterile smell of lemon polish and the faint, sweet scent of decaying potpourri. She traced the rim of her teacup with a finger, feeling the cool ceramic against her skin. There was no rhythm to her days anymore, no shared anticipation of evening meals or weekend plans. Each morning brought a hollow ache, each evening a deeper descent into the quiet. Friends called, sometimes. Their voices filled with well-meaning concern, but their words felt like faint echoes from a world she no longer inhabited. How could she explain the way the simple act of brewing coffee felt monumental, or how the sight of two sparrows building a nest outside her window could bring an unexpected rush of tears? A floorboard creaked upstairs, a sound that, in happier times, would have been Thomas moving about. Now, it was just the house settling, a gentle reminder of its age and its emptiness. Ilara closed her eyes, picturing him, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled, the way his hand felt warm and strong in hers. The memories were a bittersweet torment, each one a tiny knife twist, reminding her of what was lost. She opened her eyes, the familiar ache in her chest intensifying. The world outside continued, oblivious to the chasm in her life. The wind continued its soft, sad song, and Ilara remained in her quiet house, a solitary figure adrift in a sea of unspoken grief. The resilience others spoke of, the strength she was supposed to find, felt like a distant shore she might never reach. A gentle invitation. The soft tap at the front door was barely audible over the hum of Ilara's thoughts, a quiet counterpoint to the relentless ache in her chest. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob, a familiar wave of reluctance washing over her. It was Mrs. Gable, her silhouette framed against the pale afternoon light, a small basket clutched in her hand. A faint, sweet scent of baked apples wafted through the crack as Ilara opened the door a fraction. "Ilara, dear, I just made a fresh batch of apple tarts and thought you might enjoy one," Mrs. Gable said, her voice a comforting murmur, like the rustle of autumn leaves. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, met Ilara's, and Ilara felt a familiar vulnerability surface. Mrs. Gable possessed an uncanny ability to see beyond the polite smiles, and into the quiet sorrow that Ilara tried so hard to conceal. Ilara managed a weak smile, accepting the warm tart. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable. That's very kind of you." She felt the smooth, warm ceramic of the plate against her fingers, a small anchor in the swirling uncertainty of her days. Mrs. Gable stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the tidy, yet undeniably quiet, living room. "You've been keeping to yourself lately, haven't you, dear?" she asked, her tone gentle, devoid of judgment. She settled into the armchair opposite Ilara, her hands clasped in her lap, emanating a quiet strength that Ilara found both comforting and intimidating. Ilara averted her gaze, tracing the pattern on the rug with her toe. There isn't much to do, I suppose. The lie felt brittle on her tongue. The truth was, every corner of the house held a memory, a phantom echo of laughter, a ghost of a touch, making the thought of venturing out feel like a betrayal. A soft sigh escaped Mrs. Gable's lips. I understand, dear. Grief has its own timeline. She paused, her eyes fixed on Alara with an unwavering kindness. We'd love to see you at church this Sunday, Alara. Just a quiet service. A chance to be among friendly faces. No pressure, of course, just an invitation. Alara's breath hitched. The words hung in the air, a gentle pull towards an unknown world. The thought of leaving the sanctuary of her home, of facing the sympathetic glances and whispered condolences, sent a shiver of dread through her. The world outside felt too loud, too bright, too demanding. Yet the silence within her walls had become a suffocating blanket, pressing down on her until she felt she might crack. The thought of another Sunday spent staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick away the hours, was equally terrifying. I don't know, Alara stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The image of the sun streaming through stained-glass windows, the sound of hymns, the collective comfort of a community. It was alluring, a faint beacon in the encroaching darkness. But the fear, a cold, heavy stone in her stomach, held her rooted. Mrs. Gable simply nodded, her expression understanding. Think about it, dear. No need to decide now. The offer stands. She rose, her movements unhurried. Just know you're always welcome, Alara. Always. As Mrs. Gable left, the scent of apple tart lingered, a sweet reminder of a world that still offered kindness. Alara stood in the quiet room, caught between the invisible chains of her grief and the outstretched hand of a gentle invitation. The choice felt monumental, a fork in the road she hadn't realized she was approaching. A small step forward. The invitation lay on the worn oak table, a simple handwritten note on pale blue stationery, a stark contrast to the stark silence of Alara's small cottage. Mrs. Gable, with her gentle smile and eyes that held an understanding Alara couldn't quite decipher, had offered it earlier that afternoon. Sunday service, my dear. No pressure, of course, but the door is always open. The words echoed in the quiet air, a faint whisper against the roar of Alara's own thoughts. She traced the delicate script with a fingertip, a faint tremor running through her hand. Sundays had become a particular agony, a void yawning wide where laughter and shared rituals once resided. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath, mirroring the stillness that had settled deep within her since Liam's passing. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall felt like a hammer blow, marking the relentless march of time that she couldn't outrun, but desperately wanted to escape. A thin ray of late afternoon sun sliced through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, each particle a tiny, fleeting life. Alara watched them, a profound sense of isolation washing over her. The loneliness was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making each breath a conscious effort. It wasn't just the absence of Liam's booming laugh or the comforting weight of his hand in hers. It was the absence of a future. The sudden, jarring halt to the narrative they had been weaving together. She stood, pacing the small living room, the familiar scent of old books and dried lavender offering little comfort. Her gaze fell upon Liam's favorite armchair, still perfectly positioned by the window, a silent testament to a life that had been abruptly cleaved in two. A pang, sharp and sudden, pierced her. The quiet of this home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. The air was thick with memories, beautiful and agonizing in equal measure, each one a phantom limb aching with absence. Was the prospect of stepping outside, of facing the unfamiliar faces and the unspoken expectations of a church service, truly more daunting than remaining trapped within these four walls? The thought of sitting alone in a pew, surrounded by strangers who might pity her, made her stomach clench. But the alternative, another Sunday lost to the suffocating silence, another day spent adrift in the sea of her own grief, felt infinitely more terrifying. The quiet had become a monster, its jaws wide, threatening to swallow her whole. With a sudden resolve that surprised even herself, Alara picked up the note. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of apprehension mixed with a sliver of something akin to hope. She walked to the small phone on the kitchen wall, her fingers fumbling slightly as she dialed Mrs. Gable's number. "Hello," Mrs. Gable's warm voice, laced with a natural kindness, answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Gable," Alara began, her voice a little breathy. "It's Ilara. About your invitation." She paused, gathering her courage. "I'd like to go." There was a moment of soft silence on the other end. Then Mrs. Gable's voice, gentle and steady, replied, "That's wonderful, dear. I'll look forward to seeing you." Alara hung up, a strange mix of relief and anxiety washing over her. A small step, yes, but perhaps the most difficult one she had taken in a long, long time. The cottage still held its quiet, but now, a faint echo of possibility seemed to shimmer in the air. Sunday morning blue. The delicate scent of lavender, a whisper from the sachet tucked among her linens, clung to the pale blue fabric as Alara drew the dress from the wardrobe. It was the shade of a cloudless summer sky, its bodice dusted with tiny white embroidered blossoms. Thomas had adored this dress, claiming it mirrored her eyes, a memory that now felt like a cruel irony in the hushed room. Her fingers traced the intricate stitching, a fleeting warmth blossoming in her chest, before receding into the familiar ache. Donning it felt like a small act of defiance, a quiet declaration to a world that had become too jarring, too bright, too empty. She smoothed the skirt, its softness a gentle counterpoint to the rigidity she felt within. Her reflection, a gaunt stranger with shadows beneath her eyes, offered a faint glimpse of the woman she'd been. An almost imperceptible tremor ran through her as she fastened the tiny pearl buttons. Weeks had passed since she'd worn anything beyond somber hues, since she'd ventured out for anything but dire necessity. But today was Sunday, and Mrs. Gable was waiting. A soft rap interrupted her reverie. "Ilara, dear, are you ready?" Mrs. Gable's voice, a soothing balm, drifted through the door. Ilara inhaled deeply, the aroma of lavender and starch filling her lungs. "Almost, Mrs. Gable." Stepping out, Ilara found Mrs. Gable patiently poised in the hallway, her own Sunday best, a sensible navy suit and a small, elegant hat, impeccably arranged. Mrs. Gable's gaze softened as their eyes met, a knowing warmth passing between them without a word. She simply extended a hand, a silent invitation. Ilara took it, finding reassurance in the older woman's firm, yet gentle, grip. The morning air was crisp and luminous, carrying the distant promise of freshly cut grass and the faint, sweet perfume of honeysuckle. The sun, a benevolent eye, cast long shadows before them as they walked the familiar path to the church. Gravel crunched softly underfoot, the only sound save for the cheerful trill of sparrows in the hedges. Alara's heart hammered a quick, erratic rhythm against her ribs. Nervousness, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at her. What if stares followed her? What if pity clouded their faces? What if someone offered a kindness, and the ever-present tears finally overflowed? Yet, beneath the anxiety, a tiny, fragile spark flickered. A sense of anticipation, so faint she almost missed it, hummed in her veins. It was the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this step, this simple act of attending church, might offer a sliver of solace, a whisper of peace in the storm of her grief. Mrs. Gable squeezed her hand. "It's a beautiful morning, isn't it, dear? A good day for reflection." Her voice was soft, not demanding, but offering quiet comfort. Ilara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The church steeple, a sturdy finger pointing skyward, now rose above the treetops. Its familiar silhouette, a landmark in her life since childhood, suddenly felt both impossibly distant and overwhelmingly near. She tightened her grip on Mrs. Gable's hand, drawing on the older woman's steady strength, and took another step forward. Light through stained glass. The massive oak doors of St. Jude's yielded with a soft groan, ushering Ilara into a sanctuary awash in muted, shifting light. Sunlight, fractured by an intricate mosaic of ruby, sapphire, and emerald glass, painted the polished pews and hushed aisle in a silent kaleidoscope of color, a stark departure from the monochrome existence she'd endured. The air, cool and subtly scented with ancient timber and beeswax, offered a distinct contrast to the sharp, biting chill outside. She paused just beyond the threshold, her hand still resting on the smooth wood of the doorframe. Mrs. Gable, a comforting anchor beside her, offered a gentle, reassuring squeeze to her arm. "Come, dear. Let's find a seat." Elara offered a faint nod, her gaze drawn upward to the soaring archways and the distant, painted ceiling. A soft melodic hum began to emanate from the front of the church, a simple piano melody weaving itself into the quietude. It was neither triumphant nor sorrowful, but a gentle, flowing stream of sound that seemed to smooth the rough edges of her thoughts. The tension in her shoulders, a constant companion, eased fractionally, a subtle shift, yet as noticeable as the first thaw after a long winter. They settled into a pew near the back, the soft cushion a welcome respite. Elara observed the light dancing across the faces around her, each person a living canvas for the vibrant, changing artistry of the windows. The music continued its quiet invitation, a balm to her agitated spirit. For a moment, she allowed herself simply to be, unburdened by the insistent pressure of her grief. Pastor David, a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, approached the pulpit. His voice, when he began to speak, was a warm, resonant baritone that filled the space without being overwhelming. He spoke of solace, not as an absence of pain, but as a quiet strength discovered even in the deepest shadows. He wove a simple tale of a tiny seed buried in the earth, which, despite the darkness and the weight above it, still held the promise of a bloom. Elara listened, truly listened, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He spoke of comfort, not as a denial of sorrow, but a recognition that even within sorrow, moments of unexpected grace could arise. His words were not demanding, not prescriptive, but rather an offering, a gentle hand extended. A tiny warmth, no larger than a flickering candle flame, began to glow within her chest. It wasn't joy or happiness, or even hope in its full radiant form, was something far more subtle, a tender awareness that perhaps, just perhaps, the cold grip around her heart might not be permanent. It felt like a very small, very fragile seed stirring within barren ground. The pastor's voice continued, a steady, comforting presence, and Elara found herself breathing a little deeper, the vibrant colors of the stained glass now seeming to reflect a tiny, internal glimmer. A gentle hand. The last hymn faded, leaving the air thick with a gentle hum of quiet goodbyes and rustling coats. Elara, still seated, felt the warmth of Mrs. Gable's hand on her arm, a silent anchor. As the pews emptied, a scattering of familiar faces offered soft, sympathetic smiles in her direction. Some nodded, some offered a brief, sad tilt of their heads. Elara managed a weak, almost imperceptible smile in return, her gaze skirting theirs, settling instead on the stained glass depiction of a dove soaring above the altar. The light filtering through the colored panes cast a mosaic of reds and blues across the polished wood, creating an ethereal glow. A pair of polished black shoes paused at the end of their pew. Elara recognized them instantly, even before she lifted her eyes. Pastor David stood there, a quiet presence. His dark suit, though formal, seemed to soften his frame, and his kind, gentle eyes, usually alight with sermons, held a depth of compassion that was almost palpable. He offered a small, reassuring smile, first to Mrs. Gable, then to Elara. "Good morning, Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Good morning, Pastor David," Mrs. Gable replied, her voice imbued with her usual warmth. She turned slightly, a subtle shift that included Elara in the silent circle. "This is Elara. Elara, this is Pastor David." Elara felt a familiar tremor of nerves, a tightening in her chest. She managed a small nod, her gaze still tentative, not quite meeting his. The scent of old wood and beeswax, mingled with a faint trace of lilies from the altar, filled her senses. Pastor David's smile softened further, a genuine expression of empathy that reached his eyes. "Elara," he began, his voice a balm, "it's good to see you here today." He paused, his gaze resting on her with a gentle understanding. "I was deeply saddened to hear of your loss. Mark was a good man, and he will be greatly missed by many. The mention of Mark's name, though gentle, was a small, sharp ache. Elara's breath caught, a silent gasp. She felt the sudden sting behind her eyes, the familiar precursor to tears, and quickly blinked it away. She murmured a barely audible, "Thank you," her voice a dry whisper. Mrs. Gable squeezed her arm, a silent message of support. "Elara's been through so much, Pastor," she said, her voice laced with quiet concern. "She's strong, but it's a heavy burden to carry alone." Pastor David nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. "Indeed, grief is a journey, not a destination, and no one should walk it entirely alone." He shifted his weight, a subtle movement that suggested he wasn't in a hurry. "If you ever feel the need to talk, Elara, my door is always open. Or, if you prefer, simply a quiet space to sit. There's no pressure, only an offer of a listening ear." He held her gaze for a moment longer, a silent invitation in his kind eyes, before offering another gentle nod and moving on to greet another parishioner. His presence, though brief, left a lingering sense of warmth and an unexpected seed of possibility in Elara's heart. The little bird's song. The air in Pastor David's office carried the mingled sense of aged wood and beeswax, a familiar, grounding presence amidst Elara's inner turmoil. Stained glass window panes filtered the sunlight, scattering vibrant, fractured patterns across the well-worn rug. She perched on the edge of a plush armchair, hands tightly clasped, her gaze drawn to a small, intricately carved wooden bird adorning the corner of the pastor's desk. An eternity seemed to have passed since she had truly articulated her feelings about Thomas, beyond the silent echo within her own aching heart. "Pastor David," she began, her voice a reedy whisper, barely distinguishable above the building's soft ancient hum. I miss him terribly. Every sunrise, every sunset. It's as if a fundamental part of me has simply vanished." An unbidden tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. The futility of it was apparent. Others would inevitably follow. Pastor David leaned forward imperceptibly, his kind eyes unwavering. He offered no interruptions, no trite reassurances, merely a steadfast and silent presence. The quiet between them swelled, thick with Elara's unvoiced sorrow, until a faint tremor of resolve stirred within her. "He was everything," she continued, her voice gaining a fraction of its former strength. "My joy, my future, my anchor. Now I just drift, untethered." When her words finally ceased, the weight of her confession hung heavy in the air. Pastor David nodded slowly. "Elara," he began, his voice soft but resonant, "I once knew a small bird, a creature of vibrant plumage and boundless song, whose greatest delight was to ascend above the tallest trees, its melody ringing out for the entire forest." He paused, his gaze drifting to the wooden bird on his desk. Then, a great storm descended. Furious gales lashed the forest, stripping leaves, uprooting ancient oaks. The little bird, trapped in the tempest, lost its abode. Its meticulously crafted nest was scattered, and with it, its song. Elara watched, mesmerized by the simple tale. She could almost feel the bird's despair, the profound rending of its sanctuary. "For a long time," Pastor David continued, "the little bird remained on a broken branch, silent. Other birds attempted to console it, to share their seeds, to sing their own tunes, but to no avail. Its heart was too heavy with what it had forfeited. It felt as though it would never sing again." He looked back at Elara, a gentle smile gracing his lips. But then, one morning, as the sun warmed its feathers, a tiny emerald shoot pierced the broken earth beneath its perch. A wildflower, tenacious and brilliant, began to unfurl its petals. The little bird observed it, day after day, as it blossomed, adding a fresh splash of color to the storm-scarred ground. He settled back in his chair, his expression serene. "Elara, it's not merely acceptable to be sad, it's essential. That little bird needed to mourn its vanished nest. Yet, the wildflower didn't replace the nest. It simply reminded the bird that, even after the fiercest storms, new life can emerge, new beauty." And one day the little bird, witnessing the wildflower's bloom, discovered a new melody, a different song, born not of forgetting, but of cherishing what it had and embracing the new growth around it. A fragile spark of hope flickered within Elara, a tiny glow in the vast darkness. The image of the little bird, reclaiming its voice, resonated deeply. "So it's all right to still miss him," she whispered, testing the phrase. "More than all right, Alara," Pastor David affirmed, his voice warm with understanding. "It's a testament to the love you shared. And in time, perhaps you'll discover that new song. Not erasing the old, but adding a new, equally beautiful note to the symphony of your life." Quote, tears and relief. The tears came, soft at first, then a torrent. Alara had held them back for so long, a dam constructed of polite smiles, and murmured, "I'm fines." But Pastor David's quiet understanding, the simple warmth of his presence, had breached the walls. They were hot tears, blurring her vision, dampening the worn fabric of her dress. Yet, amidst the sharp pang of sorrow, a peculiar sensation bloomed. It was a release, yes, but also relief. A small, almost imperceptible sliver of lightness began to unfurl within her chest. She gasped, a ragged sound that tore from her throat. It felt as though a heavy, jagged stone, long lodged in her ribs, was finally, painfully, beginning to shift. Not gone, not yet, but no longer pressing with the crushing weight it had borne. The air, which had felt thick and suffocating for weeks, now seemed to allow a fraction more space, a tiny pocket for her to breathe. She wasn't sure if the relief was for the tears themselves, or for the unspoken acknowledgement that it was okay not to be okay. A truth she had denied herself. Pastor David sat patiently, a silent anchor in her storm. He didn't offer platitudes or try to stem the flow. He simply was, a steady presence that allowed her grief its full expression. When her sobs eventually subsided into quiet sniffles, he handed her a pristine white handkerchief. "There's no timeline for healing, Alara," he said, his voice a gentle balm. "And it's never a straight path. Sometimes, the tears are the rain that helps new things grow." Alara dabbed at her eyes, her gaze tracing the intricate pattern on the handkerchief. "I feel like I'm betraying him, feeling anything other than utter despair," she confessed, her voice raspy. Pastor David leaned forward slightly, his eyes kind. "Grief is love with nowhere to go. And love, true love, also wants peace for the one left behind. It's not a betrayal to seek comfort, to find moments of quiet respite. It's human." He paused, then continued. "We have a small group that meets here, Tuesdays. It's not a place for answers, but for sharing, for being heard. There are others who understand, who have walked similar paths. No pressure, of course, but it might be a gentle step forward." Alara hesitated. Her instinct was to retreat, to pull the covers back over her head and disappear into the quiet confines of her home. But the image of that heavy stone, still moving, however slowly, spurred her on. The thought of being in a room with others who genuinely understood, who wouldn't offer empty sympathies, held a fragile appeal. The silence of her own home had become a torment, echoing with memories. "Tuesdays?" she murmured, testing the word on her tongue. "Yes, just a handful of us. Tea, biscuits, and a space to simply be." She looked up at him, a faint flicker of something besides sorrow in her eyes. "Okay," she said, the word barely a whisper, yet firm. I'll come." The commitment felt like another small pebble rolling away, leaving a fraction more room for light. The path ahead was still shrouded. But perhaps, just perhaps, she wouldn't have to walk it entirely alone. A hopeful tune. The wind, which had been a mournful wail just hours ago, now rustled through the nascent leaves with a different cadence. It whispered against Alara's ears as she walked, not of sorrow, but of something lighter, a melody she hadn't heard in months. The path home, usually a somber journey, felt less burdened. The setting sun cast long, painterly shadows across the field, making the familiar landscape seem new, softened by the golden light. Each step felt a little less heavy, a fraction of the weight lifted from her shoulders. Her mind drifted back to the small, sunlit room, to the quiet words exchanged. It wasn't a cure, she knew, not a sudden erasure of the ache that resided in her chest, but it was a loosening, a release of pressure she hadn't realized was so acute. The tightness around her heart had eased, replaced by a strange, unfamiliar openness. As she approached the small cottage, its windows glowing faintly in the twilight, Her gaze fell upon the hooks beside the door. There, hanging exactly as Thomas had left it, was his old fishing hat. Its brim was faded from countless days under the sun, a few threads unraveled at the edge. Usually, the sight of it would trigger a fresh wave of grief, a sharp pang of absence. Today, however, something was different. A warmth spread through her. She reached out, her fingers tracing the worn fabric. She remembered the way he'd always tugged it low over his eyes, a mischievous glint in them, before heading out to the lake. The memory wasn't laced with bitterness or despair this time. Instead, a genuine soft smile curved her lips, a sensation so foreign it startled her. It wasn't a wide, boisterous grin, but a quiet internal blossoming, like a single, hardy crocus pushing through the last vestiges of winter snow. The smile felt real, authentic, not something she had to force or feign for the sake of others. It was for her, a small, hopeful beacon in the fading light. She pulled the hat from its hook, the familiar scent of lake air and distant wood smoke clinging to it. Holding it, she closed her eyes, and, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she didn't feel utterly alone. The silence that had once amplified her solitude now felt less oppressive. It was still there, of course, the quiet hum of an empty house, but the echo of her own despair had receded. Instead, she imagined the soft, reassuring presence of shared understanding, a quiet comfort woven into the fabric of her being. She hadn't been rescued, not in any dramatic sense, but she had been seen, truly seen, and in that acknowledgement, a connection had formed, a thread of support she hadn't known she desperately needed. The wind picked up again, rustling the leaves of the old oak tree by the porch. It no longer sounded like a lament, but a gentle encouragement, a promise of new beginnings carried on its breath. Ilara opened her eyes, the smile still lingering, a fragile but potent thing. She wasn't alone. The realization settled deep within her, a calming balm to her wounded spirit. The path ahead was still uncertain, still fraught with the challenges of rebuilding, but she wouldn't walk it in utter isolation. And, for the first time in a very long time, that thought brought with it a profound sense of peace.